Hello. In the early 1960s, Richard Hofstadter wrote a book called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life, and he was really disturbed by the victory of Dwight Eisenhower over Adlai Stevenson, who was pilloried as an egghead. And the book begins with a congressional hearing for one of Eisenhower's crony appointees to be the ambassador to Sri Lanka. And in front of the US Congress, the proposed ambassador could say nothing about Sri Lanka. Now, I start this story because those folks from the 50s make the Trump appointees look like dolts. The people that Hofstadter was upset about were reasonably talented compared to what's happening today. And I want to use that as a framework for understanding what my life's passion is about, the teaching of film. And I want you to think about film not as just a thing that one does when one goes to the movies to have fun and eat popcorn. I want you to think about the ways in which film positions us in relationship to the world and makes us think about our own place in the world. So I want to use a culinary metaphor. If infrastructure died and we wandered around the state of Illinois, we would all die of starvation despite the fact that corn plants grow everywhere, because the corn has been engineered in such a way as to be turned into high fructose corn syrup, so we wouldn't be able to digest it. This is the kind of food desert we live in when it comes to the cinema. And I want to demonstrate some examples, and I want to propose some solutions. So I've done studies of the kinds of criticism that popular reviewers have made of important movies. And added up, there's a number of trends that I want you to observe. The first is most obvious, which is popular film reviewers are not allowed to give away the ending of a movie. And this is simply unacceptable. You can't talk about a movie unless you know how it ends. Now, academic critics don't live under this stricture. You can talk about the ending of Moby Dick, because that's what literary scholarship does. And so I want you to ponder how we could fuse what academic criticism does well. It says smart things about textual material like novels and films. And I also want you to ponder the benefit of popular film criticism. So when I say the middle ground, I mean we need to take the best of both these worlds and fuse them together. What's great about popular criticism is it talks about movies when people actually care about them. And so with the exception of this opening film, most of the films I want to talk about are very, very recent. But I want to start here because a huge preponderance of reviews of Steven Spielberg's Lincoln were about what a great actor Daniel Day-Lewis was in embodying Lincoln. And that's fine. Daniel Day-Lewis is a great actor. But without a theory of acting, one cannot possibly process what that might mean. For there's not just one Lincoln, there's many Lincolns. So there's the one we learn about in high school, and there's also a neoconservative view of Lincoln. If you Google neoconservatism in Lincoln, what you'll discover is that there's a whole bunch of people that thought Lincoln was a terrible figure in American history in the 19th century. Which is a bit crazy, but my point is there's two Lincolns activated from what we learned in high school and from that form of criticism. So when Daniel Day-Lewis embodies Lincoln, he's not embodying one thing. There's a great academic article about this called A Body Too Much. Jean-Louis Comolli says historical fiction is a problem because at least two bodies and many times more bodies are activated. So there's this neoconservative Lincoln that Day-Lewis is not embodying, and there's the very sort of populist Lincoln that he is. So the popular criticism is reductive, and it can be made less reductive by using real critical tools: sociology, history, critical theory. So I go to the movie Mother by Darren Aronofsky, art filmmaker. Jennifer Lawrence and Javier Bardem live in this strange house, isolated, nothing around them, and we begin to realize it has something to do with biblical allegory. But that's not the only thing the movie is about, for it's referencing horror movies. The Shining hovers over Mother. More importantly, Rosemary's Baby hovers over Mother because Jennifer Lawrence's baby gets ripped apart at the end of the film. But what the reviewers do is reductive. They kept interviewing Darren Aronofsky, asking him, "What's the film about?" He's like, "Go watch it." "What's the film about?" "Go watch it." And he finally gave up. He said, "It's a biblical allegory." And then people brushed their hands and said, "Okay, now we don't have to think about it again." Reductive criticism. Brad Pitt's Ad Astra. Brad Pitt goes on a mission to Saturn. Something's gone wrong with a mission that his father's running, Tommy Lee Jones. And I'm sitting at the movie, and I'm like, oh, this reworks Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, right? Marlowe goes down a river to find Kurtz. Kurtz is an insane lunatic. So I go home, and I expect to find no good ideas in the criticism, but instead I find something quite wonderful. Critics write one sentence: Ad Astra is reworking Heart of Darkness. But nothing beyond that. A sentence with no meaning other than that's true. So I research why, and it turns out that James Gray told the reviewers, "I'm reworking Heart of Darkness." And this is actually quite obvious if you step back. James Gray's film before Ad Astra is The Lost City of Z, which is literally Heart of Darkness. It's about white imperialists who go to Latin America and rape the landscape. So we're getting a little closer with Ad Astra. At least there's some good idea, but it's not followed up with a paragraph that's desperately needed. This is why we care. Ad Astra reworks Heart of Darkness. And we do differential analysis. Heart of Darkness is about the failure of Marlowe to learn anything from Kurtz, and then he has to go back to Kurtz's fiancée, the intended, and talk to her about not the horrors of colonialism, but to lie to her, to say, your husband died tragically. Ad Astra, on the other hand, is about fatherhood. When Brad Pitt gets out to the equivalent of Kurtz, he has to discover that his paternal lineage is empty. And that is a very different meaning than what Heart of Darkness was up to. The film that's on everyone's mind is Joker, a completely revolutionary comic book movie that in fact guts the nature of the comic book movie. And if you read the criticism of the film, everyone knows to say it's reworking these Martin Scorsese movies. Joker is about vigilantism, and so Scorsese's Taxi Driver hovers over this film. It drips off the film while you watch it. And most importantly, since the Joker goes on TV to be a comedian, it reworks Scorsese's King of Comedy, where Robert De Niro is a comedian on the Johnny Carson show. But I want to step back and say, let's do something completely different with this. Those are obvious. They don't actually tell you much about what the Joker does. And so I want to suggest that if we use a third Martin Scorsese movie and triangulate, and no other critic has done this, we look at The Big Shave, Scorsese's NYU student film from the late 60s, It features a man in an antiseptic bathroom shaving. At the beginning, he's shaving normally, and then he cuts himself, and a little blood trickles. We're like, that's weird. And then blood trickles more, and at the end, he slits his throat. Scorsese's film is an avant-garde film about bodily performance. And if we use that as a reading frame for Joker, not King of Comedy or Taxi Driver, we discover completely new things about Joker. It's a film about performance. Joaquin Phoenix is inside not just a narrative film. He's inside a film about the nature of avant-garde performance. And he dances around and he distorts his body. Those kinds of things are less present in Scorsese's mainstream narrative movies, and they drip off, literally, The Big Shave. So those are the problems. Popular film criticism is reductive, and it's upsetting that it's reductive because there's all kinds of wonderful tools that if people were just trained to think critically about how art works, how literature works, we'd be better off. So let me give you 2 examples, and then I'll conclude. The first is another art film, Christopher Nolan's The Prestige. 2 turn of the 19th to the 20th century magicians try to one-up each other. And there's a trick where the magician disappears off the stage and appears in the back of the theater. And so one of the magicians goes to the inventor, Nikola Tesla, and says, I want you to make me a machine. And what's really wonderful about this is that Tesla is played by David Bowie. It's a remarkable casting. It's so beautiful. And he gets angry because he thinks Tesla's stolen all his money. Like, you didn't make a machine that did anything. They've got cats and they've got hats, and they're trying to manipulate them so that they can go from the front to the back of a theater. And the magician storms off angry, go outside, and there's all kinds of cats and hats all over the grounds of outside of Tesla's lab. And this moment where the hats and the cats are mechanically reproduced links the cinema to magic. That is a strong theoretical idea. It is a method that demands attention. For the cinema itself is Tesla's machine. You shoot one negative and you can make infinite prints off of it. The most important critic of the 20th century, Walter Benjamin, in the work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, defines photography and cinema as transformations in the history of art because they're about mechanical reproduction, not a painting that's made by one hand. And this is one of the great things about The Prestige. Notice that it's only 5 minutes. David Bowie never reappears. So great criticism does not depend on, is the movie any good? In this case, the movie's great, but it doesn't have to be. So here's an absurd example compared to that. Joseph Kosinski's Oblivion. His follow-up to the remake of Tron, which people didn't like either. It's a hackish science fiction movie. Tom Cruise plays a guy who defends the Earth against space alien invaders. Turns out he's a clone at the end. So at the end of the movie, the one Tom Cruise dies defeating the aliens, but then another Tom Cruise shows up to reunite with his lover and start a family and rebirth civilization. And the only moment of the movie that engaged me, the only moment of the movie that mattered to me, was this moment at the end, a minute from the end of the movie. This is Christina's World, an oil painting. They've preserved it in bark framing. There's a great essay by a high continental philosopher, Jacques Derrida. It's called Archive Fever. He's interested in the way in which science fiction impossibly projects a future about apocalypse, and yet you can't project a future about apocalypse because everyone's supposed to be dead after an apocalypse. So people have to live. So David Rin's The Postman, a Kevin Costner movie, he starts redelivering the mail. He reboots civilization, which means civilization continues to exist. And that's the archive. Christina's World is the archive in Oblivion. And there, I've taken a movie that everyone would reject. It's dumb. And there's this moment of lightning where it's not dumb. That if you drive Derrida at Oblivion, you discover something important about the nature of the stories we tell to each other. Will a future exist? And whether there's apocalypse or not, if the future exists, we will have survived to look back across the apocalypse. And it will be preserved by archives. Art archives, literary archives. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with one thought. Watched the pilot of Game of Thrones, didn't like it all so much. Running and fighting and eating and resting, Lord of the Rings nonsense. So I waited and waited. Over the break, I watched all the Game of Thrones episodes, and I know that people said about the ending, it's awful. And I endured all the fighting in Game of Thrones, and I got to the ending, and the last episode is the only episode that matters. The king becomes an intellectual historian. Bran has been converted by learning, and he's the historical repository of Westeros. And the act of making him the king, which people responding to the show were like, that's awful, is the antidote to anti-intellectualism. All the other people with swords and muscles are destroying humanity. So when this kid gets made the king, it becomes a narrative about the triumph over anti-intellectualism. This is fructifying food for us. If we know how to do this, the world will be a better place. And by telling you Bran is the king of Westeros at the end of Game of Thrones, I've ruined the ending. The world has not ended. Thank you very much.